Okay, we're gonna go quickly over just some PBR because it looks like a few people had a few questions and just the general setup. So based off of the reading that you guys did, making your PBR shouldn't be too difficult depending on the complexity of whatever you're trying to do. I'm just going to disconnect all this and I'm just going to walk through just some of the settings and setting it up and just some of the things to think about. So if I actually look at some of the default materials or the references that I gave you guys, this kind of breaks down when we're talking about the metallic, the specular, and the roughness. And we mentioned it, we talked about it a little bit earlier, and you can see how we can get some different breakup and stuff. But in essence, the roughness is going to be how reflective a surface is going to be. So the rougher it is, the less reflective it is. The smoother it is, the more reflective it'll be, up to a chrome ball. Now, how you actually see that is through either the specular, metallic, or a combination of the two. Because even if something is smooth, if it's not shiny, then you can't see a reflection in it. So when we actually look at this, we could see the metallic breakdown. And this is from a program that if you're getting into materials and stuff, this one's from Unreal, but this one is from a program that if you're looking at making materials PBR shaders, this is a really good resource and it kind of tells you a lot about it. And it goes into a nice little breakdown of what some of these mean in relationship to Unreal of making these PBR materials. Now, the general idea, they may change what some of the terminology is. Most of it is the same. Albedo is essentially what the color base is, and or the diffuse map is sometimes it's called. The fundamental difference of how this is made in difference to what it used to be was in the old days when you'd make a material or a texture, you'd want to put all the details into that one texture because the hardware literally could not show those extra details. They wouldn't be able to do the level of reflectivity of how lighting is working. So you'd have to bake everything into a single diffuse map. And that would have that could even have shadows, highlights, specularity, faked reflections, all sorts of things baked into one texture. That's not the case anymore. The only time we actually do that now is when you are doing a stylized kind of hand-painted look to whatever it is you're creating, like a more of a Nintendo-esque Mario World or Sonic kind of design. And there's other options of how you would do it, but you would do it there, and you would do it for mobile. For more advanced console computers, and even some more advanced mobile, you'd actually break it down into separate areas and regions. Each map would be controlling a different property of a material to give it a certain look. Oops, it popped into there. So what that basically means, your albedo is a texture of what it looks like minus most of those details. So in other words, your albedo actually shouldn't have any lighting baked into it. It shouldn't have ambient occlusion baked into it. It shouldn't have like weird shadows or anything baked into it. It's essentially just the color information of what that object is. And then you would actually go in and tell it with these other maps exactly what it's supposed to be. So when you're actually dealing with that and it says albedo, and Unreal it's called base color, but you'll hear people talking about it and naming it Albedo Map. So when we actually go in and then we start adjusting all these different parameters inside of it, when you see, oh, the measured base color values for nonmetals, intensity only, and then the base color for materials, what this is really asking you or saying is that when I'm actually making certain materials, this is how bright they should be, and these are the color values for certain ones. So when I would actually have a a vector parameter inside of, let's say inside of the base color right here, what it's really trying to say is if I'm trying to make these metals, these are the values in the RGB that I would use, red, green, and blue, inside a vector parameter, inside of the base color. Okay? For intensity, and what the intensity would be is essentially your adding or multiplying whatever your base color is by this value. Okay. So what that essentially means is, and you could see a little diagram of it here, what that means is that charcoal absorbs a lot of light. Okay. So on one end of the spectrum, we have charcoal, which is absorbing an immense amount of light, so its intensity is only going to be a 0.02 because charcoal is black and black absorbs light. Lighter surfaces, like snow, reflect light. Therefore, they appear brighter. So you can see that charcoal and fresh asphalt is super low. It's just absorbing most of the light. Now, and obviously what's going to happen is you're going to go in and you're going to tweak these out for aesthetic, but this is the baseline. This is where you would actually start. So when I'm actually doing these, and you can see they have these examples from charcoal on one end of the spectrum all the way to fresh snow, which is white. It's super reflective. It's pretty bright right there. Okay. Now, it's also ironic that you see it's at a 0.81. And if you remember your Maya days, when you'd actually make a material, there was an option for the diffuse color or diffuse intensity inside of a shader like a Lambert, and its default was 0.8. Okay, so this kind of gives you, these things are all connected. Now these are the colors that if I'm actually trying to get a particular material like platinum or silver or gold or copper or chromium, these are going to give me the exact color that I would want, and then I would start to tweak out the roughness of that material. That's where you go in, and if it's a metallic surface, it's a shiny surface, then I'm going to go metallic, and I'm going to plug that in. So let's just look at that just for a quick second. So if I go in over, let's grab this guy. I just want to show you a little something. We're just going to take, let me disconnect you, or you know what, I will just copy and paste you and bring you over here. So when I plug this into the base color, and we see have this material here, and I'm just going to call this one, because this is a vector parameter, I'm going to call this one base color, or even better yet, I'm going to call this one albedo color, just to get you used to that terminology. And now I'm going to go in and I'm going to make a scalar. Hold down S, left mouse button for a scalar parameter. And I'm going to plug that into metallic. And we'll call that one as such. Metallic. Oh, jinkies. I hate when that happens. Get out of there. Let's try that again. We'll just do it in here. I'm just going to copy paste. and call this one roughness so we can see the difference. Okay. All right, so we see already that's changed. I'm just going to save this because I already have a test material instance of it so we can take a look. Okay, so once that's all saved, I go in here and there's my test material. It looks just like some sort of, just a shiny, glassy kind of surface because I haven't really done anything to it yet, right? So the first thing to note is metallic and roughness kind of work a little differently. Okay. So if I move my roughness all the way to a 1, we'll notice this is a matte surface. It is flat. Whereas 0 means it is super, super reflective. How metallic it is at a 0 is we could see it's really catching the specular highlight. That means the lighting around it is kind of illuminating it and washing out the reflection itself. And as I increase that to a 1, we kind of get rid of that. And now this thing is just polished. So it's literally, you know, a chrome cube right now with a skybox reflection because it's a PBR material, so we could see the reflection inside of it. Okay. Now, as we start to adjust the roughness of this, which is basically starting to mimic microscopic imperfections, we can see that this is starting to look more like a gold brick. And then I can decide, well, maybe it's not as polished, or maybe it is, and we just kind of tone it. So you'll notice that as this gets rougher, the reflection starts to fuzzy. Now, what does that mean for images and values? Well, let's take a look. If I go back into this material, let's just say I'm going to kill both of these for a second. And I'm going to take this little fella over, oh, not you, you. Copy, paste. So here's a texture that I made, and if we look at it, it's one of those embedded textures. So if you look, I'm going to kind of go through. So this is what's in the red channel, a white box with a gray box inside with a black box inside. When I drop that red channel into the roughness, I want you to see what happens. And let me actually get rid of the color so you can see this. Okay. So what you'll notice, and I'm going to hold down L, left mouse, and I can move the lighting around. And you know what? I'm just going to put in, just so we can see it a little bit better. There we go. Maybe a little too much. Okay, so what you'll notice is that the center is super reflective, then the midpoint is partially reflective, and then the outside is absolutely not. And so what we know from the roughness is that wherever it's white, it's matted. Wherever it's black, it's super, super reflective, and wherever it's gray, it's sort of in between, and we can see that. We're getting that distortion of the reflection. What that basically means is that when I'm making a map for my roughness, let's say it's going to be a floor that's wet. Wherever it's wet, I want it to be darker in the roughness. Wherever it's matted and it's dry, and this would also go for wood, I would want it to be really white. So you're going to notice that if you have more dry surface, your map inside of the roughness is going to primarily be really light colors and only darker where it's shiny. Okay. Now, if we kill that, and then we plug that red channel into the metallic, now look what's happening here. So what we're actually seeing here is that where it's white now, we're getting a stronger highlight, a sharper highlight. And that sharper highlight is more like what would have been a thong inside of Maya. And as we go to black, it's way more diffused. Okay, so you would want to have things varying based off of that. So metallics would be certain metallics. Non-metals would have a metallic value of 0, while metals would have a metallic value of 1. And of course, this is relative to whatever type of material that you actually have in there, or that you're trying to make. So in other words, right now I have a 0 in there. Okay. And this would be non-metallic. This would be more like a plastic. This could be just a shiny surface, but it's not metal. Because metal, if I actually change that value to a 1, becomes very, 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 shiny with this highlight. And if I actually crank that up higher, you notice it doesn't really change much because it really just sticks both of these to a value of 0 to 1. Now, when you put them together, they can intensify each other a little bit. But you'll notice it stays at 5 and at 1, it's pretty much the same. But it's when I go to 0 that you notice a little bit of a difference. So if I actually go in here, let's see if I can kind of switch this. I'll just hit save. Go to test material, metallic. As I go to 0, you notice it's kind of all over the place. If I go to a 1, it gets really, or even higher, but a 1. Now let me just move my light a little bit. Then you can see a stronger, more focused highlight. This will be relative to when I plug in my roughness. So watch what happens when we plug the old roughness in now. Save. Okay. Now, so 0 diffuses it out. Going to 1, it's now amplifying that roughness. But they do work together. You see that? So what you have to do is look at a material and then say, well, which one of these, what's it going to be? Now I'm just going to do one quick because I don't want this to be forever. But so with this, I just want to show you something. So let's say I had a material. This was another material I had made. So I created this panel you might see on a spaceship or in a space station where it's like these wood plates that are all over the place. This is the Albedo map. Um, this guy is what I use to generate the normal map. I used Crazy Bump because you guys are using Crazy Bump. Normally, I would actually use Bitmap to Material from Algorithmic. I do strongly suggest that you get it if you can, but I used it through Crazy Bump just for you guys. So if I go into here, I'm going to plug this guy, the albedo, into there. And do you remember in that reference, it was saying intensity? Well, this is where you would go in, and if I change this into a parameter and call this one albedo intensity, and then multiply that, plug that into the base color. Okay, so this will control the albedo intensity. The normal map, we'll just plug you into the normals. And let's just see if we just with that, I haven't really done much, but we can see how that looks. Now, if I start to tweak, turn these guys on, so I can increase the albedo intensity. Now it looks like it's die-cast metal, which is kind of neat. I also built a, I can tile it in here. But what actually works better, let me show you this. Oops, wrong one. Offset, there we go. The offset, I can move this. This is a totally tiling texture that I can offset so I can fix corners so they look like, oh wow, this thing continues onto the other side. I can see the thickness of it. That works out pretty well. Now, if I go into my roughness and I drop that to, once again, a 0, we have chrome, which, though neat and shiny, and people love shiny things, is not exactly what you want to have. And if I go to a 1, it's no longer metal. So what I need to do is find that sweet spot of how much I want, see that? And then go in metallic wise. So remember, it was like 0 is, it's not really metallic, and as I go to a 1, it is. But you have to find that sweet spot of the look that you want. Now, right now, I'm applying this to the whole thing. That looks kind of neat. And that may or may not be what I would want to have. And if I didn't, you can see I can really crank that up, the intensity, that down. And if I didn't want that, and typically I don't, then I would use things to break this up. And how I would do that is I would go in and I would decide, well, how do I want to break this up? Do I want to be able to control the metal itself and then have the grout, or in this case, since it's not cement, but the metal underneath the inset between the panels, that's not shiny, but these metals are? Or do I want vice versa? Or do I want something, want to have a whole lot more control over it, where I can actually go in and pick something like this material over here, and what would happen if this guy, I just took the red channel of this and plugged that into metallic. And then we have this sort of effect. You see this? Where that one texture is kind of breaking things up a little bit. Or better yet, maybe, maybe this will tile. Maybe instead of that, I would want it inside of the roughness map. That looks pretty cool. If we had a normal map as a detail map that would go with this, then we could control this starting to pop out and even color it red and really start to break that up. And since this is in the roughness, it's not in the texture itself, we can see it's not really, it's just affecting where it's shiny and where it isn't. However, if I went in and then I multiplied this, and plug that into the base color, and then hit apply. So now it really becomes more evident. And if I actually go in and adjust how metallic it is, we can see we can adjust that. And though that looks neat, it's not exactly what I would want either. So maybe I would want something like this to be a controller in a lerp. And that controller would say, or a cloud texture to say, okay, where do I want this the roughness to be, and where do I want chromey, where do I want it to be more rough and dull. And if that's the case, then I would just put these guys back. Well, let's just actually so let's say this is going to control the roughness. Okay. So then I would take a lerp and I'd have two values for roughness. I have to name them basically 1 and 2. Now, the only problem, since this isn't a black and white image, this is going to be a little bit harder to control, but I can do that. Let me show you how. I'll pull this out. I'm going to run it into what's called a power. This allows me to control contrast. And I'm going to put a scalar parameter and call that scalar parameter roughness. Oh, jinkies, I hate when it does that. Stop. Roughness contrast. Okay. So I'm going to control the contrast of this just like I would in Photoshop. Plug this into the alpha. So I have basically, let me clean this up so you don't have spaghetti all over the place. Using this image, this one, which actually, you know what? It'd be better if I had a better image to work off of. Let me grab one. Wait for it. I'm going to find something a little bit better than that. Something more cloudy. And remember, since we're actually, that might work. It's only 512 by 512 though. Why not? This is a small texture, so it's going to look a little weird, but let's just see what happens. This is actually a fire texture. Oops. And I pulled it into the wrong material. Silly me. Okay, so here's a fire texture, and I know this is kind of weird. I'm just going to use the red channel of that fire texture. It's a little low res. We'll see if it works. And I'm using these two parameters to control it, and we're going to plug this right into the roughness. So basically where this is at is going to control. And I'm going to hit apply. So far we don't see anything, right? That's okay. Let's go into the instance, turn these guys on. There we go. So as I turn, ooh, I like that. Check that out. So as I adjust the contrast, look at this. How cool is that? Now, as we have this, I can adjust how this looks and how that looks. So we have roughness. Let's crank this one up. We have a 0 and basically a 1 on the other. And then the contrast itself is adjusting how these guys blend together. Look at that. I can go in. There we go. And this just allows me a lot more control. Just breaking stuff up. I could use the same technique to create dirt, to control that, to control any parameters. The basic way that is going to help is looking at an object and then trying to make it, or if you have an existing one, just deciding what do I want to do to kind of change things and muck things up. And it could very well be that, oh, I say this, and then the output of that power that I'm using as an alpha, what would happen if I did multiply that by that texture? I don't know. Let's find out. Plug that into the base color. And hit apply. Ooh, that's sweet. So now check this out as we go in and we adjust that contrast. You can have this cool tarnished look and then just say, wow, well, you know that this part, I don't want it to be that rough. That's pretty cool. I like that. And it's a nice way of controlling how much dirt and stuff you'd have, or how reflective it is, or having something age over a certain amount of time. Pretty cool. So hopefully this will help a little bit. If you have specific questions, just ask me. Next week, we are going to get into some more advanced shaders, skin materials, skin shaders, and stuff like that. The one thing, let me save this real quick, that I do want you to check out is the default materials in that final content that I told you about. Let me see, I have a lot of stuff open, so let us hope that my machine will be able to open this up okay. We'll find out in a hot second. Let me see here. Let me see. close this real quick. Yes, save changes. And I'm going to try and upload this so you guys can at least pull it down if you want to take a look at it. Let me just double check something. Oh, the humanity. Material item. You know what? Let me pause this. So open up if you get to get a chance and you get stuck. Go to the marketplace, download. Goodness, where are you? Learn a few things, which would be the content examples. And essentially, the one that I have is a materials package as well. And you can actually look inside of there and say, oh, yeah, let's just look at materials. And it'll load that up. And some of these, obviously, you have to pay out of the, out of the nose for. This one, this one was actually a freebie, if I recall. And this is the one that you should probably take a look at. Automotive materials. Double check. I think that one was free. And then there was another one that was actually a freebie that had a bunch of base materials. And if you actually, start loading some of these guys up, you can essentially do the backwards deconstruction thing to see how they're built for specific ones. This is showing you subsurface scattering. So, and you can see how it has that nice sort of highlight to it. So if I double click and where the light is, that's light passing through it, which is really nice. You want to use this effect for skin. You want to use it for different things like porcelain and plastics, and it just makes it look so much more realistic. So going into these and just doing a little backwards deconstruction of all the crazy things that you can do and seeing what these guys can do is just going to be really, really helpful. So that when you do go in, let me go into the no, not that one. Yeah, sure. Just load the different site. So you can take a look at that, and then essentially you'll be able to see just some of these cool things that you can actually make when you start opening up these materials and just really breaking them down. So if I go into here, this is the Lightroom, but it's just where I have the GT. That was it, the GT free materials. Look that up. And if I go under Showcase, check this out. So look for the GT free materials inside of the actual marketplace. And I want you to look at these because these are really, really nice. And what they are is just really good examples of just a lot of base materials and what you might want to actually create. And of course, it's taking its own sweet time. Let me pause that for a sec. Okay, here I had to kind of look it up, and here's where that pack is. So if you just do a search for GT free materials, and then you go to the UnrealEngine.com marketplace, but link, it'll take you right there because you don't actually have to be inside of the marketplace to get them. And I highly recommend they're free. Look at all these nice materials and check this out. This is what some of the things that you get. And then you can take a look, double click, and then really glance at how they are put together. But these will give you a really good idea. Plus, you can always go into um, yeah, that's fine. You can always go into just the content that I showed you first, the example content, and that'll give you a whole bunch of really cool things. If I go to File, Open Level once it's in, and you see there's, oh, Advanced Materials, Material Experiments, Material Nodes, Material Properties, and these give you a really good, some really nice examples that you can actually load up. Check it out. Like I said, just go in, backwards deconstruct them, and then start to see how they're built, and they're nicely laid out, see? Let me know if you have any questions.